أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين باعث الأنبياء والمرسلين والحمد لله الذي لا يبلغ مدحته القائلون ولا يحصي نعماءه العادون ولا يؤدي حقه المجتهدون الذي لا يدركه بعد الهمم ولا يناله غوص الفطن الذي ليس لصفته حد محدود ولا نعت موجود ولا وقت معدود ولا أجل ممدود فطر الخلائق بقدرته ونشر الرياح برحمته ووتد بالصخور ميدان أرضه ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين شفيع المذنبين حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من يوم عداوتهم إلى يوم الدين أما بعد فقد قال الله عز وجل في كتابه الحكيم وهو أصدق القائلين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وقل ربي أدخلني مدخل صدق وأخرجني مخرج صدق واجعل لي من لدنك سلطانا نصيرا آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم صل على محمد وآل محمد السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. I begin in the name of Allah, the most kind, the most merciful. It's due to that kindness and mercy that we have these opportunities where we gather in remembrance and glorification of Him, Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. We then begin this sermon the way the Commander of the Faithful used to begin many of his, by advising us, Usikum ibadallah bitaqwallah, that we advise you, O the servants of God, to be God conscious, God fearing, and pious human beings. Before we begin, the first two lines are like first class. Yeah? And when you have a chance to get into first class, you don't wait around for the opportunity. So please fill in the two lines in the front. This is the masjid area. You get, inshallah, more barakah. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. We have been for the past 9 months or so discussing the journey of self-purification. And we said that the next step that we have been discussing for the last 2 weeks is ma'rifatun nafs, the ability to know oneself so that they can journey towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Last week we began discussing the prophetic tradition in which Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, Salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, is reported to have said, Man arafa nafsahu faqad arafa Rabba, that one who knows themselves will subsequently know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Our ulama tell us that there are numerous interpretations to this, and that if we focus on these interpretations and try to reflect on them, it will without a doubt create a deeper understanding of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is the ultimate goal of self-recognition. Last week we talked about one of these proofs or interpretations, and that is Burhanun Nadam, that is the proof of organization. And that is that whenever we find any type of organization, it is only an intellectual deduction to produce that this organization must have an organizer. Ahsantum. Remember that line. It is very simple. Yeah? And so when we look at our own bodies, when we look at our own souls, and we see how it is fashioned, it is impossible for it to come out of a vacuum. Hence, we will find God in that way through reflection and understanding. Today we look at 2 more proofs just so that we can give this hadith its due respect. The next proof is the proof of wajib al-wujud and imkan al-wujud, the proof of necessary and possible existences. It is said that when a human being ponders over their own existence, right, they realize that our existence is entirely dependent upon other existences for our existence to exist. I know it's a little bit, a lot of exists there, right? But understand what we're saying. That when we reflect on our existence, we conclude that our existence is entirely dependent upon other things for our existence to survive, right? We are not an independent existence. So for example, we need air, we need food, we need water, we need shelter. All of these things are necessary for our existence to survive. Without these things, we would cease to exist. And so that's one understanding, that we are dependent and needy of other existences for us to survive. Furthermore, even on a more basic level, when we reflect, we find that we would not be in existence if it were not for our parents. Yeah? And so we were dependent upon our parents to bring us into existence. And they were dependent upon their parents to bring us into existence. And they were dependent, and it continues to go on this way. When we reflect about this, right, the fact of how dependent our existence is on other existences, and when we look around, we find that this is a common theme. It's not just me who is dependent upon other existences, rather all of us are dependent upon other existences. The only natural conclusion that we have is that there has to be an existence that started off all other existences who is not dependent, because a continual and perpetual chain of existences is impossible. As it is said, at-tasalsul mahal. Yeah? It is impossible for there to be an infinite chain of existences or dependencies that go on. There has to be a starting point. And when we reflect on that and realize how much we are needy of other things, there has to be an existence that is needless entirely. There has to be an existence that is independent entirely, that brought about the original existences from which all other existence became possible. And that is how, through our own reflection, we find that there has to be an existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These are very beautiful explanations. Yeah, you have to be inclined towards them, to be quite honest, but I feel that they are necessary for us to solidify our faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The third proof that they give, and this is, I think, the most beautiful proof, and that is the proof of fitrah. Yeah, these three ways that we are discussing, they discuss 8 different possible explanations to this hadith. We'll talk about these 3 because these 3 are most commonly discussed in books of theology, right? There is the innate proof, there is the simple proof, and then there is the philosophical proof. We've talked about the simple and philosophical proofs. Now we go to the most basic and innate proof, and that is the proof of fitrah, yeah, the proof of innate nature. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Ar-Rum, verse number 30, فَأَقِمْ وَجْهَكَ لِلدِّينِ Hanifa, that direct your face to the upright religion. Fitrat Allahi allati fatara nasa alayha, to that fitra, that innate nature upon which Allah has created all of the creation. Yeah? What that means is that every creation internally has the ability to recognize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala without any external proofs. Yeah? We all have that ability. The fire of fitrah burns within each and every one of us. Now, if that is the case, and if that is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has described fitrah and His own proof or existence, another important question that comes about is, then why are there people who follow different religions, right? Or why are there people who don't even follow any religion? Or why are there so many discrepancies that take place? The answer to this question is important, right? That when we say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created us on fitrah, it does not mean that every heartbeat beats the beat of tawheed, right? What it means is that when we reflect on this innate nature that each of us have, it will lead us to conclude that there has to be Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It requires effort. And that's what we're not willing to do sometimes, right? We are willing to numb that internal heartbeat that we have and chase other things that will distract us from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But if we were to focus on it, cultivate it, each and every one of us would be able to find Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let's give one example, right? Every human being loves perfection and beauty. Yeah? Every human being, no matter where you are, no matter where you live, no one likes a life of difficulty. No one likes a life of hardship. Everyone wants some level of comfort and peace and perfection in their lives. Now, the grades of that are different. Somebody, for example, living in a impoverished third world country, for them, their simple task is, let me get water for my family today. And if they were able to get water for their family today, it was a day of success. Yeah? And so they met that criteria of perfection. We living here have different criteria of what we think is important to us. But every one of us is striving towards this perfection, to this beauty. Now, I, for example, and you, for example, let's say have a particular goal to reach that perfection. And we strive for that perfection. When we reach it, inevitably there will be something else that our heart desires after that. We won't stop. Yeah? I, for example, want $1 million. Now that I have $1 million, what do I want? $2 million. Yeah? I want a car. Yeah? Now I have a car, now I want what? A bigger house, another car, something else. We don't stop with the perfections. And so what we find is that ultimate goal that we thought was our ultimate goal is not our ultimate goal. There's always something else that comes about. That in itself should cause us to reflect. Secondly, in our journey towards that perfection, what we find is that in attaining it, I am not entirely satisfied. Why? Because I need so many other things to be right for me to enjoy that particular perfection. So let's say my goal was $1 million and I achieved $1 million. Now I lost my health. I would give away that $1 million to get my health back. Right? And so what we find is that even in that striving of perfection, I am dependent upon other things to bring about the true perfection that I want. If we were just to reflect on that and realize that innately we desire perfection, but that perfection can't be found with these material things. If we were to reflect, we would find that the only true perfection is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is how we find God, through fitrah. People think fitrah is automatic. It's not automatic. You have to work on it. But I tell you that if we work on it, and if we understand why my internal heartbeat is driving me towards something, but I keep chasing the wrong things. If only I chased God, I would find complete satisfaction in my life. And when I can understand that about myself, man arafa nafsahu faqad arafa rabb. They will find Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I swear to you, if we find the proof of fitrah, we don't need anything else in life, because we have found the ultimate proof that God Himself placed in our hearts. These are just some examples of the importance, my brothers and sisters, to reflect about our own creation. When we ponder over it, it is inevitable that we will find that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is haqq. And when we find God to be haqq, it becomes so much sweeter to submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wa akhiru da'wanan alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد صدق الله العلي العظيم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والحمد لله قاسم الجبارين مبير الظالمين مدرك الهاربين نكال الظالمين صريخ المستصرخين موضع حاجات الطالبين معتمد المؤمنين اللهم صل على خاتم النبيين وسيد المرسلين محمد اللهم صل على وصل على سيد الوصيين أمير المؤمنين علي بن أبي طالب السلام اللهم صل على وصل على الصديقة الطاهرة فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وصل على سبتي الرحمة وإمامي الهدى الحسن والحسين سيدي شباب أهل الجنة محمد وآل محمد وصل على علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي والحجة القائم المهدي صل على محمد وآل محمد صلاة لا غاية لعددها ولا نهاية لمددها ولا نفاد لأمدها اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات الأحياء منهم والأموات وتابع بيننا وبينهم بالخيرات إنك مجيب الدعوات إنك على كل شيء قدير صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. Last Saturday, an 18-year-old white man by the name of Peyton S. Grendron arrived at a supermarket in a predominantly black neighborhood in Buffalo and shot 13 people, 11 of them who were black, killing 10 of them in the process. We must have heard about this in the news, and it should have broken each and every one of our hearts to see this happen, you know. Again, I think this is important from a slightly different perspective that, you know, when we see these type of events happen, oftentimes they happen in Muslim countries, our heart breaks. But when they happen in other countries, we just look at it as a news event. I think that's a problem, yeah. We are always asking for the wider world to look at the Muslim world and have their hearts broken, but it goes both ways as well. Yeah? The gunman was draped in body armor and actually wore a camera and live streamed the entire shooting. And he was eventually captured by the police unharmed. So, strange. Yeah, we can talk about that too, but we won't talk about that. Yeah, you know, there are so many different angles that we can look at this from, but I want to look at it from two perspectives, or two different angles. One is the rampant gun violence that exists in America. Yeah, in 2022, keep in mind we're only in May of 2022. There have been 198 mass shootings in America already. Yeah, when we talk about mass shootings means that at least 4 people have been injured or killed by one shooting. There have been 198 of them already, which when you break it up by weeks, 19 weeks into May, it comes out to approximately 10 mass shootings a week that happen in America. Yeah? Imagine how many we don't hear about, how many are not reported, but how these things are happening. That means more than one a day, 1.5 a day mass shootings are taking place. And sadly, no one is addressing the gun problem. You know, we chalk it up to a lot of different things. Lone wolf, we often chalk it up to. Mental illness, we chalk it up to. But the main issue, of course, is the fact that guns are so readily and easily available to the people, right? This particular man who carried out this act of violence just this year in 2022 went out and bought an AR-15, an automatic rifle. This is an assault rifle, sorry. This is a weapon that shouldn't be available for anyone to just go and purchase from your local Kmart or Walmart or whatever stores that they have. But unfortunately, no one is willing to address this particular issue. And so unfortunately, we will find that these type of events continue. The second angle, which is frustrating, is the growing threat of white supremacy in the Western world that we live in. Right? It is good that the American president called this event what it was, a domestic terrorist act, right? And we often find that leaders are not willing to label such acts as terrorism, but this was. This 18-year-old man, posted a 180-page manifesto affirming white supremacist beliefs in which immigrants and people of color are viewed as replacers of white people. There's an entire ideology now, the great replacement theory, as they call it, right? And in this, he quotes, and this is just one particular quote that he had. He said that he plans this attack to show the replacers that as long as the white man lives, our land will never be theirs and they will never be safe from us. This notion that white people are being replaced in their countries was originally a far-right fringe ideology beginning in France. But lately, this ideology that immigrants, people of ethnicity, and blacks in particular, are replacing the white citizens of that particular country has become now a mainstream ideology, right? We find it within the Republican Party. Many of the people who run for Senate and the House of Representatives in America who are Republican continue to echo these same points, right? Fox News personalities like Tucker Carlson continues to echo these same points. And when you find that people in position of power echo a particular point that maybe is inside my heart, but I'm too timid to bring it about, it brings one and gives one courage to speak and act on that. If you go back a long time ago, we talked about bigotry, asabiya, and how does bigotry come about and racism come about. One of the keys of racism is that people often have these ideologies, but when they see people of power talk about them, it gives them courage to talk about it and act on it openly. And this is what we see taking place. This theory is not reserved for the United States alone, right? This is a theory that we see rampant in European rhetoric, right? The fact that if you just think about what happened in Ukraine and how the immigrants and refugees who fled Ukraine were so welcomed into European countries. Why? Because they didn't view them as threats, as replacers, because they were people with the same skin color, right? But when a person of different skin color comes at their door, they view them as wanting to replace them. And so this is why there is such hesitancy and racism, even when it comes to refugees. But we also see this in Canada, right? So this country, oftentimes we see this country as very timid as opposed to other countries, and in a way it is. But at the same time, this ideology exists in our countries. And if you just look at one example, the freedom or the so-called freedom convoy that took place in Ottawa, one of their main organizers and leaders is a man by the name of Pat King, right? And Pat King, in a media interview, speaks about an end game. He said that the ultimate goal of the people is to depopulate the Anglo-Saxon race. And again, this is somebody living in Canada, organizing events to get their voices across in Canada. He said the ultimate goal is to depopulate the Anglo-Saxon race because they are the ones with the strongest bloodlines. This exists in our own lands. This exists in the world that we live in. And there is this amazing duplicity, hypocrisy in all of these things, and we called it out when the Ukrainian war started. We call it out sometimes when different events happen. But even with this, I remember, and all of us remember, that whenever a Muslim does an act, or a person who claims to be Muslim does an act of violence or terrorism, the expectation was that every Muslim come out and condemn that particular action, as if we are responsible for the actions of those people. And we were guilted to do that. Yeah, we were guilted to do that. And this, we find that the majority of the white citizens are quiet when it comes to this, especially those in positions of power. And the duplicity is something that we should not be afraid to call out. Yeah? The duplicity of that is something that we have to bring into the mind frame of people, because I feel sometimes when people act hypocritically is because they don't realize they are acting as hypocrites. I think that's one of the main things. They just don't realize it. Sometimes in our own lives, We may have a different set of conduct for our wives and our mothers, and of course there is a different decorum. But the hypocrisy we don't realize until we are told, hey, you're being a hypocrite. You don't yourself do these particular actions, right? And so sometimes we need to remind of this. This is the world that we live in, okay? It's a great world, but at the same time, it's a world that is filled with chaos. And we have to realize that we are part and parcel of this chaos. And until we take steps to ensure a future generation that lacks this chaos, we will unfortunately continue to see this. Last week, we talked about the importance, right, of having our children participate in the education system, in journalism, in these professions that will paint a different narrative than that is currently been painted right now. But this also echoes another point that we're coming to. We're coming to the elections very soon, right? The Conservative Party is going to pick its leader very soon, right? Provincially, we are coming to an election very soon. We pick our leaders. The Muslim voice, I think we fail to realize sometimes how powerful our voting base is, yeah? That we can drastically change the outcome of who we are going to be our leaders. And our leaders are the ones who set this rhetoric, right? And so please, those voter registration cards that you got in the mail, don't discard them. Use them wisely, and inshallah together we can have a unified voice to make sure that the leaders that we elect are going to speak the rhetoric that is important for us and the future of all good people in the world, inshallah. Wa akhiru da'wan an alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ صَدَقَ اللَّهُ الْعَلِيُّ الْعَظِيمُ.